lifts the spirits and intoxicates the senses. Gods were created for it. Now robots bottle it. And sometimes its cost can make a prince a pauper. Not bad for something that we shake, stomp, and hide underground. Now, wine on Modern Marvels. It's known simply as Crush, the annual fall harvest of grapes that marks the beginning of California's winemaking season.
We usually start harvesting grapes in September. It's the time of year where all of our hard work from an entire year kind of comes to fruition. It's kind of the Super Bowl for us.
Every year in winemaking regions around the world, millions of tons of grapes are gathered, either by hand or by powerful mechanical harvesters that shake the vines into submission. In California alone, more than 3 million tons of wine grapes are harvested annually. But the decision to machine or hand pick is just one of many that every winemaker must make. At Buena Vista Carneros, for example, the harvest is done only by hand and occurs at night to preserve freshness.
The warmer the fruit comes into the winery, usually the less fruit intensity you'll have in the final wine. So we're really, really big fans of getting out there when it's cold, get the fruit in here and take care of it from there.
At the winery, the grape clusters are quickly sorted. Then they fall into a destemmer, where a series of beater bars gently knock the grapes from their stems. Once separated and cleaned, the grapes are now ready to become wine. Grapevines are among nature's great survivors and often thrive in places where little else will grow. Initially divided into red and white, there are literally thousands of grape varieties in the world, although only 6: Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Merlot, and Cabernet Sauvignon account for 80% of all American wine sales.
Each grape imparts different flavors into the wine, depending on how juicy the grape is, how thick the skin is. Some of the grapes are very aromatic, some are not. Some of them have better color, more tannin, the astringent, puckery flavor that's common to wine.
But no matter their color or variety, all wine grapes will share a common destiny: fermentation, one of nature's remarkable processes. As the grapes grow on the vine, they develop sugars within as a byproduct of photosynthesis. Only the grape's elastic skin protects these sugars from a naturally occurring yeast that forms on the grape's exterior. When the grape skin is broken or crushed, the yeasts assault the sugars, consuming them in a fury that results in alcohol.
If you took these grapes and would put them in a bucket full in the back of your car and you stomped them a little bit, about a week later in your garage, you'd have some wine being made. It's pretty amazing.
Today, presses of all sizes are used to extract the grape juice and begin fermentation. To what degree that juice remains in contact with the grape skins and even seeds is crucial to the character of any wine.
With a white grape, we'll separate the juice and the skins immediately, and that juice will ferment by itself. With reds, we actually ferment the skins and the juice all together. Because everything that makes a red wine what it is in the skins. The juice itself is clear, it's colorless, it doesn't have the true flavor of the varietal. So the character is really in the skin.
French scientist Louis Pasteur was the first to clearly define the biological process of fermentation. Although the mystery of wine fermentation had taken generations to solve, its intoxicating effects have been known throughout time.
Well, they found sunken jars in present-day Iran that they dated to about 4,000 to 5,000 years BC.
Nearly every civilization since has made wine a centerpiece in its religious and cultural life. The Greeks and Egyptians spread winemaking throughout the known world, and the Romans became its first great merchants. But throughout the ages, no civilization has been more passionately associated with wine than France. Beginning in the 11th century AD, French monks were the first to make detailed studies of the complex relationship between wine and the soil and the climate in which it grows. Over time, the monks walled off parcels of land that consistently produced wines of greater subtlety and flavor. Parcels that today still make the most expensive wines in the world. Remarkably, many of those vineyards were located in the thin mineral soils along slopes and ridges, where growing conditions were harder. This reflected a concept we now call stress.
And it's a concept that winemakers and grape growers come back to, because a vine that struggles really does produce wine with more intensity and more color and more structure. And the stress from the rocky soil here, from the lack of water, from the wind that we see on a ridge top like this, really adds to the intensity of a wine.
Buena Vista Carneros is the oldest premier winery in California. But in the 1990s, a wave of the vine-killing insect Phylloxera swept through the Napa and Sonoma valleys, forcing Buena Vista to replant 30% of their vineyards.
Phylloxera became a problem in California in the early 90s, so they had to end up replanting a lot of the vineyards all at the same time, which was very costly. But it also gave them an opportunity to capitalize on the improvements in viticulture in the last 20 years of the 20th century.
One of the most important improvements is precision farming. High-tech tools like digital aerial photography give those at Buena Vista a view of their vineyards otherwise invisible to the naked eye.
Our background is actually in remote sensing of other planets, so studying the moon and Mars, NASA technology, and so we wanted to apply that same technology to the Earth.
Using images taken at 10,000 feet with a 4-band digital camera, companies like VineView Imaging create a series of maps based on thermal, near-infrared, and other color spectrums. These maps reveal much about the condition of the vineyards. For example, because of the intense sun, vines must cool themselves, or their basic chemical functions begin to fail. Healthy vines will evaporate water through their leaves and roots and appear in this stress map in light green and yellow. Vines that are struggling are in the red and brown regions, while the dark green areas are understressed and not working hard enough. Bringing all the vines into better balance may mean a simple adjustment in irrigation. However, if the pattern persists, it may also signal a need to replant the block with a different type or variety of grape. And what was once a single vineyard must then be farmed as many.
Well, right here today, across the 800 acres that are planted, we have 167 different blocks. And each of those blocks, we really farm as an individual vineyard. So we don't think of this as an 800-acre vineyard. It's really 167 little vineyards. And you have to approach it that way because the needs of this block are very different from the block next door, where you have different soil types, you have different water holding capacities. And that's really the beauty of what we've done here.
Construction of each new vineyard block requires other high-tech tools to precisely define their physical layout.
Basically what I do is I come out to a new development vineyard or even an established vineyard, and I use the GPS to shoot off the satellites in space to map out the area that they're going to plant the vineyard.
GPS units lock in where the vine rows are spaced and planted, and also position irrigation pipelines, manholes, and other practical elements. Once this work is completed, all that is needed are the vines themselves.
This is a typical grafted grapevine that a vineyard here would use to plant for their vineyard. And it's composed of really two different plants. Well, it's the rootstock, which is the bottom part here, and then we call the signwood, budwood, or we call fruiting wood on the top.
When young, these two independent vines are joined together in a process known as bench grafting. The new graft is dipped in wax for protection, then raised for 1 year in the nursery until it's replanted in the vineyard.
This point here's where the graft was made at Mr. Herrick's nursery. And from this point down, obviously, is a rootstock, and then we grafted a scion or budwood on top of this. In this case, was Pinot Noir.
There are 16 distinct rootstocks grown at Herrick's, each offering the winemaker a potential match for the various soil conditions at his winery. The fruiting wood is chosen both for the type of wine the winemaker wants to produce, as well as for the climate and weather of the region where the winery is found.
Here in Carneros, it's a very cool region. You can see today it's a fairly gray morning. We get a lot of fog, very, very cool weather typically compared to some other growing regions. So that's driven us to really focus on what we consider cool climate varietals. Chardonnay, Pinot Noir are the classic cool climate varietals around the world.
But even then, within varieties like Pinot Noir or Chardonnay, there exist distinct strains, known as clones. In the vineyards at Buena Vista, there are currently 25 different Pinot Noir clones planted.
But each of these clones will have a different characteristic, different flavors, maybe a different ripening pattern. And the whole goal for us is to match up that exact clone on the perfect spot. And that's how you make the best wines.
Grapevines require 4 years to bear usable fruit. The first grape buds appear in March. For the next 7 months, growers keep a diligent eye over every inch of the vineyard, constantly measuring growth and stress patterns.
6 inches depth, we have a very, very dry, 18% moisture.
By the fall, each block of grapes has developed unique characteristics of flavor, acids, tannins, and color. These blocks are then harvested and fermented separately in order to form the building blocks of the wine to come.
Well, by keeping each vineyard block or little section of the vineyard separate through the winemaking process, it allows us to put different blends together at the end of the year. You might have one section of the vineyard that gives you really great cherry and berry flavors, and you might have another section that gives you really good kind of earthy, complex flavors. Well, we can take those wines, blend them with all their brothers and sisters, and come up with a wine that's more complex, more interesting, and in the end, tastes better in the glass.
What took the French monks centuries to discern can now be manipulated and fine-tuned in a matter of years. In less than a decade after the phylloxera wave, Buena Vista Carneros is again making award-winning wines. But technological innovation isn't confined to just the vineyards. It's in the winery as well. Think Americans love wine? Some scholars believe the citizens of ancient Rome consumed so much that it surpassed 1 bottle per day for each of them. Wine will return on Modern Marvels, here on the History Channel. We now return to wine on Modern Marvels. They're one of the industry's biggest players. Yet outside of the wine business, few have heard of them.
This is a 94,000 square foot facility. It houses 3 bottling lines. 2 of the bottling lines run at 240 bottles per minute, and the latest line we added runs at about 200. So you combine all that capacity, we can kick out 55,000 cases of wine a day.
Founded in 1974, Bronco Winery produces more than 20 million cases of wine annually. A leader in what is called the value wine business.
Good wines should be something you enjoy with good food, and you should be able to afford to do it every day. That's the name of the game.
Of Bronco's 40-plus labels, only a few sell for more than $10 a bottle. Their most famous brand, Charles Shaw, is popularly known as $2 Chuck. That's right, $2 a bottle, which wine drinkers enjoy at a rate of 5.5 million cases annually.
It caught the ear of the public and caught their palate and their pocketbook, and so people were buying wine by the case and drinking it regularly.
Less than an hour's drive from Bronco's high-powered bottling facility, is one of Napa Valley's most historic wineries, Chateau Montelena, famous for its handcrafted wines.
The wine industry is a nice pyramid, like many things like that, and there's the mass bulk producers that are making lots and lots and lots of cases. And that's a part of the industry that's good, because it brings wine at a good price to a lot of people. But what we do is we're making what we consider handcrafted or estate wines. Part of what you're paying for is the love and the labor of these people trying to make every single bottle of wine special.
Together, the value-driven Bronco and Montelena's handcrafted vintages reflect the two primary trends of not just California wines, but of winemaking around the world. When California State Senator Alfred Tubbs founded Chateau Montelena in 1882, he envisioned a winery in the tradition of the great French estates. By 1896, Montelena was the fourth largest winery in Napa. But Tubbs' legacy was cut short by the advent of Prohibition. For wineries across California, the temperance movement meant the end.
There were over 700 individual wineries in operation prior to Prohibition, and less than 50 or 60 survived Prohibition.
But if Prohibition had brought a close to the first great era of California winemaking, its repeal began another. Science and technology were applied to wine growing as never before, as the wine industry sought to regain consumers. Vineyards were planted on a mass scale, and innovations devised at colleges like the University of California at Davis became standard. Today, that innovative spirit still echoes in powerhouse wineries like Bronco, which owns more than 35,000 acres across 9 California counties.
It's all dealing with today's technology and applying it into the science of making better products in a more economical way. They keep those prices down and keep those imports home where they should be.
Here, grapes are shaken from the vine via a fleet of 43 mechanical harvesters. At a typical rate of 10 tons per hour, 80 men would be needed to pick the equivalent of just one harvester on an average day. During crush, 300 trucks arrive daily at Bronco's winery, one about every 3 minutes during the harvest process. A series of 30 to 50-ton presses turn the grapes into juice. A typical press is a large cylindrical container with a rubber membrane affixed to the interior walls. This membrane is steadily inflated with air pressure to extract the juice, which flows into circular perforated drain channels. Full pressure is maintained for only a few minutes before the membrane will deflate and the residue will be removed. High-powered centrifuges then eliminate nearly all remaining solid waste, enhancing the quality and speed of the wine's development. Fermentation occurs over 12 days within this sea of 45 to 54-foot tall storage tanks, capable of holding more than 80 million gallons of wine. Once ready, the wine is shipped to another Bronco facility, where it is quality checked, bottled, and then corked.
We call them jaws. It's like a diaphragm, almost in a camera, because what it will do is it'll squeeze or constrict around the cork, and then it squeezes it smaller than the opening of the bottle, right? And then a plunger, just a metal rod, comes down and shoves the cork into the bottle.
When Bronco owner Fred Franzia's grandfather opened his first winery in the San Joaquin Valley, the hope was to sell a good bottle of wine at a fair price. Today, Bronco delivers on that dream at a rate of 240 bottles per minute.
I'm a firm believer the consumer is the smartest person out there, and he knows what he wants. And we've got to find out, as suppliers of the consumer, the products they want and what they want to pay for it. And if you give them good quality at good value, they find it.
In 1972, lawyer Jim Barrett purchased Chateau Montelena and began to revitalize the winery. In only a few years, his efforts would make history. In 1976, a British wine merchant in Paris organized a blind tasting test that pitted world-class historic French wines against the new wave of American upstarts, including a 1973 Montelena Chardonnay. Despite a panel of all French judges, the Americans won every category.
They beat the French wines, and this was quite a startling thing.
Now known as the Judgment of Paris, this single event transformed world perception of California wines overnight.
That one event, that tasting in the summer of 1976, suddenly the barricades to marketing of handcrafted California wine dropped in one day.
Today, Montelena's commitment to handcrafting wines extends from their exceptional vineyards to the winery. No detail in the process is overlooked. When fermentation is complete, all of Montelena's wines are stored in oak barrels. Whites for 8 to 9 months, reds for upwards of 2 years. Many of these barrels are handcrafted at Seguin-Moreau, one of the world's historic cooperages. No glue or nails are used to construct them, and the type of oak from which they're made will produce distinct flavors in the wine.
French oak has quite a bit of tannin that it brings to the wine. It brings sweetness, complexity, and structure, which are all things that are good for big red wines or white wines. It gives them longevity, it gives them length in the bottle. American oak is known for its aromatic characters, a lot of vanilla and spice, and it sort of is also known, it fills in the middle of a wine very nicely.
As the wines age in the oak, Barrett and his team taste them constantly.
Cruising along nicely. Take a look in December and see what we think.
Once the wines have reached the desired richness, blending begins, a process that takes weeks.
Even if you like the first blend and say, man, this is fantastic, we still have to go back and make sure that we couldn't do something better.
Altogether, the creation of a Chateau Montelena wine takes a minimum of 1 year for whites and 2 for reds. That commitment to quality is a hallmark for many wines, including the king of them all, Champagne. Skim just 1 inch of wine from the top of Bronco's biggest tank, and it's enough to make 540 cases, equal to 6,480 bottles of wine. Wine will return on Modern Marvels. We now return to wine on Modern Marvels. Champagne, the king of wines. Born in silent and humid cellars, its sparkling character and intoxicating bubbles are the very essence of celebration.
The carbon dioxide that's formed during the fermentation process evaporates, is allowed to escape, but in champagne it's trapped in the product and it's only released when the bottle is opened.
To understand this remarkable wine, Champagne must be thought of as a place as well as a drink, a region of France with its own unique geography and history. Throughout the centuries, every French king maintained vineyards here, and the wines became a staple of their coronation ceremonies. But Champagne is located at a more northern latitude than Quebec, Canada, making it one of the coldest wine centers in the world. And because of this northern locale, a unique pause in the wine's development occurred during winter, when the cold stopped fermentation until the spring thaw.
In the beginning of spring, the temperature outside were going up. Then the fermentation process resumed. And one of the two results of the fermentation process are bubbles on one side, and on the other side, carbonic gas, pressure.
Once opened, pressure within the barrels caused the wine to froth, a phenomenon that French winemakers including the fabled monk Dom Pérignon, spent decades trying to reverse.
Dom Pérignon was trying to remove the bubbles from champagne. The English discovered that they liked it, and they've always been the best customers for champagne and sparkling wine. And probably without their interest, there wouldn't even be champagne as we know it. It would be still wine, no bubbles.
In 1811, the French champagne house of Perrier-Jouët was founded, born appropriately of a marriage between the daughter of a vineyard owner and a cork maker. They immediately began to export their champagnes to England. By then, champagne was cellared in bottles rather than barrels, which captured the CO2 gases, in essence, carbonating the wine. In less than a generation, Queen Victoria herself had embraced Perrier-Jouët, and it has remained a favorite in British circles ever since.
To me, the best reward is the letter we received from Oscar Wilde in 1888, when he has been thrown in jail. And he were asking in jail, jail is nothing, but what is so difficult to survive is the lack of Champagne Perrier-Jouët.
Champagne is made from 3 varieties: Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier.
We have 65 hectares, classified 99.2% on the quality scale of Champagne. So basically, we have one of the most unique terroirs of Champagne.
Through 2 pressings, fermentation, and blending, these remarkable grapes are handled just as they would be for still wines. Juice from the first pressing, known as the cuvée, is considered the finest. In Champagne, consistency is prized above all else, and the new cuvée is blended with wines from previous years to ensure every bottle of Perrier-Jouët reflects what is known as the house style. Only after the blend is finished do the bubbles come. A second fermentation is induced by the addition of new yeast and 24 grams of sugar to each bottle. The yeast again consumes the sugar, but unlike in the frothing oak barrels of old, the resulting CO2 remains trapped inside the wine. For 3 years, the dying yeasts will continue to impart flavors to the wine. During the final year, the bottles will be turned and elevated 8 times a day in a process known as riddling. Riddling encourages the dead yeasts to settle into the neck of the bottle. Although not harmful if consumed, the yeast simply isn't very pretty, and so it's removed in a process known as disgorgement. In traditional disgorgement, a single blow of the winemaker's tool causes the cap on the bottle to explode, catapulting the yeast out. To maintain the distinct qualities of this remarkable wine, strict laws assert that only those wines grown and made in the Champagne region can bear the name Champagne on their label. Annual production is also limited, ensuring quality while also guaranteeing that labels such as Perrier-Jouët will be in constant demand. But that hasn't stopped French winemakers from reaching out to other parts of the world, where technologies now bring new meaning to old methods. Consider the advanced automation at Mumm Napa, producers of one of America's most popular sparkling wines. Here, bottles of sparkling wine are filled at a rate of 120 bottles per minute. Sophisticated computer programs oversee state-of-the-art riddling machines that move large containers of the sparkling wine a fraction of a turn at a time. Only 6 to 8 days later, the neck of the bottle is frozen, capturing the yeast in place. When the bottle is mechanically opened, the frozen yeast pops out in the form of an ice plug. One of many remarkable solutions to age-old problems.
When it comes to wine, we use the latest progress of phenology, for sure, but we use it only to complement tradition.
But France isn't the only land steeped in tradition, nor where the past and future combine to make a world-class wine. Recent scientific studies have suggested that every bottle of champagne generates at least 49 million bubbles by the time it's finished. Wine will return on Modern Marvels. We now return to wine on Modern Marvels. They're called stairways to heaven, centuries-old vineyards carved into the steep hillsides and rugged canyons of Portugal's Douro Valley. Rising as high as 1,000 meters above the river below, these terraces were built from the very rock and schist that made the Douro one of the most uncompromising landscapes in all of Europe. Yet here, in this once remote, defiant place, nature and history have conspired to create one of the world's most treasured wines, port.
Well, basically, port is a fortified, what we call a fortified red wine from this region of the Douro Valley of Portugal. The grapes have been crushed just like for a normal table wine, but we've actually stopped the fermentation halfway through by adding what we call brandy. It's like a 77% alcohol by volume grappa. And by adding brandy, you kill the yeast off, so you end up with the wine having about half its natural sugar. So the wine is semi-sweet with a slightly higher alcoholic content than standard red wine.
No one knows who first added brandy to wine, a process now called fortification. But what is clear is that the impetus came not from an ancient winemaker's cellar, but was born of geopolitics, empires, and war.
Port was actually invented by the British as much as the Portuguese.
Beginning in the 17th century, perpetual conflict with France led British merchants to seek out alternative sources of wine, especially in Portugal.
Some of the original port wines were actually wines sourced on the coast of Portugal. And as the market developed, people's tastes got more sophisticated, and merchants started coming upriver, trying to find better wines. And the Douro Valley, which is some 70 or 80 miles from where we are to the coast, the wines from this region were considered fantastic. The trouble is, the whole trip, the journey downriver, it then would have to be shipped a couple of days to England, and the wine, having come that much further, would spoil. So that's when they started adding brandy, and that's what, helped preserve the wine and make it famous.
The additional brandy ensured that wine shipments from the Douro made the long journey to England. Continued unrest between Britain and France spurred demand for port and led to the rapid transformation of wine production in the Douro well into the 19th century. Winemakers, for example, began to define proper wine-to-brandy ratios that not only made the port more stable, but also created truly unique flavors and character. Wines were no longer transported in resin-lined goatskins, but rather in large barrels known as pipes, still the standard measure of port today. In the spring, these pipes were loaded aboard small skiffs, known as robelos, for the dangerous journey from Douro to Oporto, from where they were shipped to England and abroad. Today, a new revolution is underway, led by companies like the Symington family estates, the world's leading port producer. The Symington family can trace their roots in the industry back 13 generations, to the very founding of the port trade in the 1600s. They now oversee 24 quintas, where famous ports like Dow's, War, and Graham's are born.
We've got about 3 million vines now under our management and ownership.
And while they're fully aware of port's rich heritage, their focus is very much on the future.
This is the Quinta dos Malvedos winery. Malvedos is a property that has been associated with the Graham port brand since 1890. And these buildings were where the original port was made from the Malvedos estate. Traditionally, port was made by foot treading, and a bunch of people, about 20 people, would jump into a tank and literally stomp it by foot.
Foot treading was first practiced by the ancient Romans, who recognized that small, thick-skinned grapes, like those grown in the Douro, needed to be crushed firmly and quickly to initiate fermentation and extract the optimum flavor and color. Traditional presses simply did not apply the same direct pressure as human feet, which ground the grapes into the floor of the stone tank, known as a lagar. In the 1960s, the Symingtons installed an auto-vinification system that uses pressure built up during fermentation to maximize extraction. But for the finest ports, the system just couldn't match the juice tread by foot. And so the family made a long-term commitment to design and build a robotic lagar.
It has 4 plates that slide over each other hydraulically. There are silicon toes on the end of the plates, and those silicon toes will literally grind the skins against the floor of the tank. The feet themselves are temperature controlled. They're heated up to 37 degrees centigrade, same as the human leg. So you've got a warming effect in the feet. They also can work all night if they have to, whereas the humans would only do it for 2 or 3 hours in the late evening.
Once fermentation has brought the wine to the desired sugar levels, the fermenting wine is drained into a storage vat where the neutral flavored brandy is added.
We add about 1 part of brandy at 77% alcohol by volume to about 4 parts of must, which is at about 7% alcohol by volume. So if you do the math, it works out a wine at about 19.5, 20% alcohol for the finished blend.
Once it is settled, the wine will travel downriver, where it will be judged for flavor, clarity, and other characteristics.
Well, we'll take some of these lots and then we'll put them on the bench and we'll try and put them together in such a way to make something really great. Occasionally you'll have one individual blend, which is great, but we believe, like, 2 + 2 can add up to 5 in our business. You can really put 2 things together and make something even better than the sum of the parts.
In general, port can be divided into 2 fundamental styles. Ruby port is aged in oak, then bottled after 3 years, and features a bright red color and general fruitfulness. Conversely, tawny ports are aged in oak at least 6 years, during which time their color and nature transform.
The longer you leave it in barrel, the wine goes from that purpley red color and it fades into a lovely nutty kind of amber brown color.
In rare years, when all the conditions are exactly right, port winemakers will declare a vintage year. These wines spend only 2 years in oak before bottling, where they will be left to mature for decades. Vintages such as the 1970 and 1955 grams are among the most cherished wines in the world, not simply for their flavor, but also for the sense of history and place they evoke. And for some, those are qualities to be treasured above all else, especially in one of the world's great cellars. Portugal is not just famous for wine, but also for its cork oak trees that supply half of all the world's corks, nearly 7 billion a year. Wine will return on Modern Marvels, here on the History Channel. We now return to wine on Modern Marvels. It's perhaps the world's most famous restaurant, La Tour d'Argent, located on the right bank of Paris in the shadow of Notre Dame. Founded in 1582, La Tour was a favorite meeting place of King Henry III, who often stopped by after hunting along the Seine. Legend holds that it was here that he learned to eat with a fork. Since then, the restaurant has served the rich and powerful for centuries. Not surprisingly, 30 feet below the restaurant itself is perhaps the world's finest wine cellar, one that dates back to the 1820s, when the restaurant was rebuilt after being burned during the French Revolution.
The oldest wine bottle is an 1845 now. Unfortunately, the 1811 comet year from Lafitte got broken by one of my cellarmen. We had to get rid of him.
Currently, the cellar holds upwards of 450,000 bottles, including all of the most prized vintages in French wine history.
1868 Gros La Rose. Gros La Rose is Saint-Julien Cabernet-based wine, and that is like amazing to imagine that still with us.
The cellar's temperature naturally ranges no higher or lower than 53 to 59 degrees, while the humidity stays fixed at an exacting 75%. It's considered the most technically perfect cellar in the City of Lights. Aging is one of wine's greatest traditions. Yet even today, no one knows exactly what happens to wine as it transforms over time. Some have theorized that chemical elements within the wine, primarily the tannins, bond with other compounds. Others suggest those same compounds are broken down. What's clear is that the aromas and flavors become more numerous, layered, and sophisticated.
2 days ago, we had a bottle of Vendée Clos du Chêne, 1885, and the nose was so pungent. You're talking about a complexity, maybe 50, 60 different aromas, and they all come at you slowly. It's magical.
In fact, so prized are these complexities that some have been willing to risk their lives for them, including the former owner of La Tour d'Argent, the father of the current owner. In 1940, Claude Terrel was a young French soldier stationed south of Paris when the Nazis began to march on the French capital.
Just before the Germans arrived, he flew into Paris, and he, with one of the staff members, one of the cellarmen, bricked up about 3/4 of the cellar. They covered it with dust and made it look as if it had been here for several centuries.
Today, only some bits of mortar remain where the fake wall once stood and baffled the Germans for more than 5 years. But the full scope of the courage shown by Monsieur Terrel can still be felt and seen and tasted in the rare wines within the collection, still evolving, still a living history.
The time and the effort that's been taken to keep it this long, the wars, the strife, the famines that have gone around it, and it's still here. It's still here today. It's very moving.
While only a few cellars in the world can boast of 1845 vintages, private collectors are building their own cellars, where wine, technology, and personal histories are joined.
I had seen an article in Wine Spectator about Paul Wyatt, and it showed some of his cellars, maybe 15 years prior to that. And I'd always had in mind, I said, you know, someday I'm going to have myself a cellar by that guy.
For over 30 years, Paul Wyatt has been a pioneer in the creation and construction of private cellars.
There are two kinds of cellars. There are cellars that just store wine. They're like shoe boxes. You want to keep shoes in a box, that's fine. People do that. There's lots of people out there making cheap racks. All the racks on the market work to hold wine. But this is more than just a statement about the person whose cellar it is. It's a statement about the wine collection.
This cellar is designed to highlight the owner's 4,500 bottle collection, including his rare collection of Chateau Yquem, perhaps the most treasured white wine in the world.
We collaborated on the design of the cellar, and I wanted to have a place to show the Chateau Yquem and the way that it changes color as it ages. So we designed this light box. It has a low temperature in there, and it's fine for the wine. And at the same time, you can see the beautiful colors as the colors change.
Temperature, lighting, and security are all computer controlled, and no detail has been overlooked. The entire rack system is made of redwood and stands more than 9 feet tall and nearly 4 feet deep. Most remarkable of all, it's freestanding and self-supporting. Nothing is fixed to a wall.
Also, we're deep in earthquake country, and this whole system is not fixed to the room. It's sitting on the floor, and it's quite flexible. And it's going to move a lot in earthquakes. It's a very live system.
But even amid all the technology, the real star remains the wine itself.
A lot of people have never heard of the labels that I have. That makes it really fun, too, when it comes to sharing, is that you have something that the other people have never tasted. It is an obsession, passion. I never could believe that I would be hooked so deeply on one particular thing, like a crazy little bottle of wine.
According to a recent study, 90% of all wine is consumed within the first 24 hours of purchase. Truth be told, less than 5% of the world's wines are designed to age more than 5 years. The rest are meant to be enjoyed much sooner. So, drink up.